Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. I am your host, Ivy Han. If you're like most of us, you're probably planning to retire in your 50s or 60s. You might be dreaming of vacationing, maybe perhaps owning your business, or spending a little bit extra time with your kids. Well, I've got Courtney Chase today and her partner Nicole, who's doing it or has been doing it all in their mid 30s. They retired early by living this lifestyle called FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. It involves cutting down your cost and your spending, saving most of your income, and investing to build a giant's nest egg so you can afford to retire much earlier. Courtney also shares her experience on her blog, Modern Family, and explains how others can achieve financial freedom like she did. So, with that, I wanted to give a warm virtual welcome to Courtney. So, Courtney, how is it going today?
It's great. Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining me today, and it's a pleasure of having you and be able to have this conversation with you. Now, being retired at such a young age, you're in your 30s. Most people probably wonder how you did it. What was your financial situation like in the early stages, and what sort of gave you the courage to embrace on this fire journey?
Yeah, so we didn't inherit anything. It's not like we came into money. It was more so the opposite. We saw a lot of money mistakes happening being made by my own family. So I knew I wanted to do the exact opposite of that. So really the impetus for us was our student loans. We combined, Nick and I had about $110,000 in student loan debt. And it was our mission to pay off those loans as fast as possible. So over 2.5 years, we each paid off our respective loans, and we wanted to be in control of money and not the other way around. So that was the big kind of driving factor at the beginning. So we were used to our money going elsewhere versus spending it on, everyday things. And so once the loans were gone, then we decided to look into house hacking, where basically we bought a short sale house and filled it with roommates and had multiple roommates living with us. It was a 4-bedroom place, and we were able to pay our mortgage off in 2.5 years. And we learned about travel hacking and travel rewards through credit cards and sign-up bonuses. So we've traveled to 25 different countries over our 10-year journey here, and then the investments kind of took off after that. Once we had put that money away towards our loan and put that money away towards the house, then we learned about how to optimize from the investments point, low fee index funds and tax advantage accounts and things like that. So that was kind of the start of everything for us.
Now, what specific tools and information did you sort of need, I guess, to get started on this fire journey?
Yeah, so understanding the mindset is key. That's the hardest part. I mean, we live in a world of advertising and marketing and consumerism, and to spend every penny that you make.
Yeah.
And so, learning the opposite of that and just figuring that difference out is huge. So we've always been frugal and considered savers versus spenders throughout our lives. So that part wasn't really too hard for us, but it's hard for a lot of people out there. And so we've always valued life outside of work more than our jobs, and we wanted to prioritize that. So how do we spend more time outside of work? So we were able to escape, all that marketing and advertising. And really, we discovered the Mr. Money Mustache blog back in 2012, I believe, is when I figured it out or found it. And I thought, okay, we found our people. Like, all the stuff kind of clicked with me. Yes, this makes sense. This makes sense. And so really the investing side is actually, in my view, the easy part. It's having the money to invest that's hard. So once you can figure out how to save some of your income, whether you're working a minimum wage job or making 6 figures, it's having that, being able to manage the money that you're taking in. And that's the key to all of this, which is really hard for most of our society to grasp.
hmm I can certainly echo that. Now, if you had to, I'm sure there are quite a number of things that you did to sort of get you prepared on this journey. Now, if you had to sum it up, like what are the top five things you would say that you did to get started with the lifestyle?
Sure. Okay. So the first thing that's key is to track your expenses, like to the penny. So we had a super simple Excel spreadsheet that we started back in 2009, and I'm still using the same one today. It's very simple where I just track every little expense that comes out and every income that's coming in. And so you can see that difference. And that is basically how you calculate your savings rate, which is really important in the FIRE community. And that also helps you determine what your FIRE number is. Like, how much money do you need? It's all based off of what you spend. So not having, an awareness of your spending is not going to help. So being aware and in tune with your finances is step number one. And most people think, oh, I spend, say, $500 on groceries or whatever. But if you're not calculating it, you really, really don't know. And then you could be spending money on things that, as you track it, it's more the mental exercise. 2 weeks after, when you go in and track things and put it in your spreadsheet, you might say, hey, I never even wore that shirt that I just bought. I'm not going to buy that again. Things like that, right? So that's key. And then figuring out what it is that you value, not what your friends value, not what your family or your siblings or your neighbors. It's what do you value. So you need to figure that out. That is different for every single person. So figuring that out, again, like all of these are kind of key things. And then avoiding lifestyle creep. So by that, I mean, if you get a raise of, say, 10%, instead of spending that 10% on, more rent and moving to a nicer place or buying another car or something like that, you maybe spend 10% of your raise, but save the large majority of it and put that towards your debt or your investments and let that money grow for you instead. And then figuring out how to optimize life, like how to hack life. So whether it's simple things like car insurance or phone plans, your grocery shopping, figuring out all the different free or secondhand items out there that you can buy instead of new. Those are all little hacks that can still provide you the same type of things. Like, you're not depriving yourself, but you're just doing it at a much lower cost. And then realizing the last thing I'd say is realizing that a simple life can be a happy life. And, that again goes against the society that we live in, but you realize, like, simplifying things and having time to have a nice slow breakfast, make your own meals, have time to read, have time to meditate, just think, just breathe, all these things, have time to sleep. These things are that they kind of get, put to the wayside in our current culture. So having time to do all of that is so satisfying and, again, comes at a very low cost.
Hmm. Absolutely. And most of us I'm sure, are living or used to living a certain lifestyle during our earning years.
Yeah.
Now, when you made this transition to fire, did you have to compromise your lifestyle? I know you and Courtney and Nicole have always been frugal, saving a large portion of your income. But, any compromise to your lifestyle much to really make those numbers work?
Not really for us, because we had started off with those loans and then the house and then the investing. So we were used to our money going elsewhere, a large chunk of our money going elsewhere anyways, rather than just spending it on, going out and drinks and whatever. So that's really important, to not let lifestyle get to you. And if you're learning about FIRE, this financial independence community later on, once lifestyle creep has come up, it's much harder to kind of rein that down and reduce your spending. So it's a lot easier if you can learn about this when you're still in school, or you still have loans, or you're living with your parents, something like that, and you're used to this kind of tight living lifestyle. But there's no rhyme or reason to what you can spend. It just means that means you have to save that much more. So if you're able to reduce that lifestyle creep and lifestyle inflation and get it back to a kind of more steady level, it's going to be easier to reach your FIRE number.
And it seems like everybody's, fire number could be different, right? So,
Yeah,
for example, you would probably perhaps only need 1 million to retire comfortably, and you're happy with that. And some people might need 2 million, right?
right.
So it's all about planning ahead and be able to make. I guess in some cases, I'm sure you would have to make compromises, but just really starting to build that habit and have or maybe think about financial planning as part of the process. Now,
Exactly.
speaking of investing approaches, so you're now in your 30s and you're living this lifestyle at the moment. So, what was your specific investing approach or strategy that really did help you build towards your financial freedom?
So we are boring investors. There's really no like, oh, we learned about, whatever, Tesla like 10 years ago. It wasn't like that. So we are, 95% of what we invest is in low fee diversified ETFs that are tracking broad markets. We invest mainly in stocks. So we have a portion of our portfolio in bonds. The other 5% of that, non 95% in ETFs is we have a little bit in crypto, a little bit in one single stock for the company that I used to work for, and some ARK funds. And that's it. So that's 5% is like my go crazy fund, but 95% of it is pretty like generic, vanilla, low fee index funds. So then on top of that, we've maxed out our registered accounts. We focused on our RRSPs, our spousal RRSPs, our TFSAs, and the RESPs for our kids. But really, like, wealth is what you can't see. So that's the key to building your path towards FI. It's not having this flashy car, this flashy house, or this flashy outfit, or, being on brand with things. And if that's your thing, that's fine, as long as you're able to save more on top of that, right? But it's having that money put away, and that is the wealth that you can't see. It's your accounts, it's your account balances, and not spending every single penny that you earn. So as I know, it's easy to say and much harder to implement, but that is the best investing strategy to go after, is trying to increase your savings rate. In the FIRE community, we typically talk about saving 50% or more of your income. And if you're not there, nowhere near there, that's totally fine. Let's say you're just matching your company RRSP match or something like that at 5%. That's great. That's a great start. Now, how do we double that? How do we get that to 10%? How do we double that to 20%? How do we double that to 40%? And then, you can take, this could be a 5-year process. It's not something that you have to do, tomorrow, but just looking at your expenses again and looking at your earning. How can you earn more? How could you spend less? How do you increase that gap, which is your savings rate?
Any helpful, I guess, investing choices that you've made really helped you? And I'm sure every investor is a little bit different, right? Some may have higher risk tolerance, some may have, could be a little bit more conservative, but just any specific things that you did really helped you, and perhaps any mistakes that you can point out for clients to avoid?
Yeah, sure. So understanding your time horizon and your risk tolerance, like you said, is very important. So if you are trying to save up for a down payment on a house that you're looking to buy in the next year or two, putting that money into a stocks ETF or something like that is probably not your best bet, more a high interest savings account. But if you're talking for your long-term retirement in 20, 30, 40 years out, then it's learning to become comfortable investing in the stock market for the long term. And there's a book called Stocks for the Long Term. So that is a great book. And just feeling comfortable with the volatility. You see stock markets kind of go like this in the short term, but long term, it's an upward trend. So being comfortable with that and testing that out. Maybe you start off, with a 60-40 portfolio where you're 60% stocks, 40% stocks, 40% bonds, and then increase that maybe to 80-20, and then maybe 90-10, and then maybe 100% stocks. Depends on your risk tolerance. And again, this is something personal. Personal finance is personal for everyone, right? But on top of that, investing early and often is key. Even if you're starting out with $5 a week or $5 a paycheck, just getting comfortable with the idea of investing and really getting to that first $100,000 net worth. That is the hardest part. That is the grind. That is coming from you. Even if you're investing it all in 100% stocks, the majority of that from the zero mark to the 100K, that's most likely coming from you and your savings and putting in that your contributions. So then, later on, compound interest, you see the magic of compound interest and how it really, really does, take you from the 7-year time horizon, let's say, for that first 100K to 5 years, to 4 years, to 2 years, to 1 year, for that next 100K increment each time. So again, like I said before, focus on increasing your savings rate. That's huge. If you can go, in increments to get there. Don't check the markets and don't be overly obsessed with your net worth. Back in the beginning, I never checked my net worth. It was negative for such a long time with the student loans. It was just more, how do we chip away at these? But now, we check our net worth quarterly, and that's the most frequent that I've ever done it. Back in the day, it was maybe once a year, something like that. Taking taking advantage of your tax advantage accounts, your RRSPs, your TFSAs, your RESPs, and then your non-registered accounts. You're going to get a ton of tax benefits that way, especially if you have kids. You can lower your adjusted income, get a higher RES or a higher CCB, Canada Child Benefit from that. Or if you're a high income earner now, put that money into your RRSP and then take it out when you're going to be in a hopefully lower tax bracket down the road. Automate as much of your investments as you can. So again, it's like you're not having to think of it. Dollar cost averaging, all these things where your psychology and your emotions and you are out of the picture. I think a lot of people, that's one of the biggest mistakes, is people get very emotional with their investing and they say, oh, I think because of this news tip, the stocks are going to go down next week. I'm going to pull everything out and just wait for this crash, and then I'm going to put everything back in. And I'm going to be this genius, right? Everyone's thinking that, right? But how can you time? You have to time the exact top and the exact bottom, which is nearly impossible, right? And so just forget it, set it and forget it. And then understanding fees, your MERs, and again, the magic of compound interest and how both of those work. And really it's just the less you think about it, the better your portfolio will likely be. There are so many easy ways to get started in investing now, especially compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You can be in one fund and have access to tens of thousands of companies. So it's the education part, right? That's what everyone needs to do. And there's so much free information out there. It's just having that drive and that motivation to seek it out.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I certainly echo all of those points. Now, speaking of family, you and Nicole are a family of four with kids. I've got two myself, which can be quite expensive. Did you have to adjust any part of your financial strategy or your investment plan when kids came into the picture? I know that certainly wasn't the case before. You guys didn't have kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So kids were not really in our picture at the beginning of this. We were in our early 20s. We are privileged and fortunate to be money savvy in our 20s, to be set up, financially well when kids came into the picture. But now that we do have kids, our kids have become our why to all of this. We want to spend time with them. We want to be there for them. We want to raise them. We want to see them with all these firsts and these milestones that they encounter. So for us, and I think many people now in the FIRE community, when it started, it seemed like it was kind of more the single white tech bros were kind of like the figures, in the FIRE community. And now you're seeing a lot more diversity, which is great. And part of that diversity is families. And we realize okay, we're doing this grind. We're trying to work hard. We're trying to save this money so that we can spend this time with our family, right? So it's super that. A lot of people see that as a hindrance, having kids, but I think once you discover FIRE, you realize this is your why, this is your motivation. So for us to start, it was more travel, and we wanted to feel comfortable where we can quit our jobs, leave Florida, move up to Canada, and have nothing lined up and travel for a year in between. So that was our, motivation at the beginning. And now that we have our kids, okay, we want to be there, especially when they're young, maybe when they're in school aged, we don't see them as much, maybe we pick up some part-time fun hobby or something like that. But right now, while they're little, it's this is why we're doing all this. And we know they're going to cost more money down the road. So we have that factored into our FIRE numbers and everything. But yeah, so part of all this is when we had our first kid, Nick went on parental leave with the intention that she was going to go back to work after that 18 months. And it turned out that we did some numbers. She wasn't happy with her job, and looking at the cost of childcare, it likely makes more sense for you to just be at home at this point. So she didn't, that's when Nick stopped working, was 3.5 years ago when our first daughter was born. And then I adjusted to a part-time job in 2019. So that was, again, this is part of a slow transition to FIRE. And then now that our second son was born, now is when I have stopped working. Now I'm on parental leave. We did have to, learn about, RESPs, Registered Education Savings Plan, and CCB, Canada Child Benefit. And so we do invest, $2,500 per child per year into their RESPs. So that bumped up, our numbers that we would need to save. So we plan on doing that. And, kids can be expensive, but they don't have to be expensive. I think that's more a parenting decision, especially in these younger ages when they don't really have much opinion. Once they're older and they get influenced by their friends or whoever, I'm sure they're becoming who they are. They're going to, have their opinions on what they want to do. But especially at these younger ages, like, you really don't have to spend much. Like, for our daughter, for her first year, we spent about what you could spend on an expensive stroller is what we spent for her whole first year. Like, you don't need to buy all these crazy things. I think the only thing that we bought new was her car seat, and then, disposables like diapers and wipes and, bath lotions and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a lot of people outside, as you mentioned, outside the fire community, may think that if you're retired early or if you are retiring early, you're perhaps bound to run into financial troubles or issues in the future because you stopped working so early. Now, how do you plan for contingencies or unexpected events in life?
Yeah, sure. So we did build a lot of buffer into our numbers to account for future unknowns, be it a new roof, a new computer, a new phone, supplemental health coverage, the list goes on and on and on. So that, being aware of that and not just looking, okay, this is what my spending this year, this is what I need for the future. It's being realistic about your numbers and being, okay, do we want to have XYZ sort of contingencies in place? And maybe that means you work an extra year or two to get your number up to that level. So be it. And then in the fire community, there's this typical 4% rule in quotes of that you're going to be withdrawing. And that's how you come up with your fire number, which equates to 25 times your annual spending. And we personally are very cautious and conservative with our numbers. So we plan to spend less than the 4%. We're actually going to be under 3% of our withdrawals. So looking at past history of, the worst case scenarios, the Great Depression, the high inflation eras of the 70s and 80s, anything that was 3% or under has a 100% success rate when looking at, all past scenarios. So we feel comfortable having a higher number built into our plans for all the unknowns. And then, of course, you can also, adjust your discretionary spending. So during a down year. So for example, let's say we have, X number budgeted for our travel for the year, but it's a down year. The markets aren't doing very well. Well, instead of going to Europe for a month, maybe we do camping locally for 2 weeks, something like that, where we're still doing things, but at a lower cost. And then you can always pick up, some sort of stress-free part-time job, go work at your local coffee shop or your bakery, something that's fun and enjoyable. And maybe, between Nick and I, we bring in an extra $10,000 a year, like nothing crazy, but that will likely help weather those storms too. And then lastly, which I think a lot of people forget, is we are humans, we are not robots, we're flexible, and flexibility is really the key to all of this. We are going to have variable spending. There are going to be some years where our spending's higher than normal and some years where it's lower, and you adjust accordingly every year, and if it looks like, say both of our kids want to go into travel hockey, which is crazy expensive. Okay, we'll figure out a way to make that work. It's not like because we left our jobs right now, we can never, ever, ever make any sort of income in the future. And I think a lot of people outside of the fire community, we call them the internet police, they come and attack you, oh, well, you're not retired then. It's well, I've retired in the sense that I'm not stuck to a job. I'm not dependent on a job, I now have the flexibility, the freedom, the options to choose how to make money, however that may be. So I think that's, another thing out there is, people think just because we stopped our corporate jobs in our 30s, we are never, ever able to make another penny again. And that's very unlikely for most of us in the fire space.
Yeah. So some people might be inspired, I'm sure, by your story, but may feel like it's a little bit late for them to either start or maybe perhaps reach this fire lifestyle. Now, what would you say to convince them otherwise? Well, maybe leave it that. Any helpful tips that you could actually offer, Courtney, to get them started today?
Yeah, sure. First off, it's never too late to start. The best time was 20 years ago, of course, but the next best time is today. And the biggest, tip and thing that you can do is read. Really, there's no one looking out for you and your best interest more than you. That goes for your job and, asking your boss for a promotion and, being your biggest cheerleader there. It also goes for, educating yourself on personal finance. Unfortunately, it's not really taught in schools these days, or if it is, you get this much information and don't really know what to do with it, right? Which is why these webinars exist, right? So, there's really no one looking out for you. And there's a ton of free education out there. So much content, that's what we're doing. Like, we have our blog, modernfamily.com, and that, we have an interview series where we have, over 20 people now, explaining their story, how they did it. And there's no cookie cutter way to FI. And like I said, whether you're starting off in debt or having a $100,000 net worth, if you're starting out saving 5% or 50%, there's always ways to improve, and it's figuring out how to improve without depriving yourself. That's key. We're not trying to say cut out everything and go live in a basement or go rent a room and never do anything. That's not what this is about. So it's finding out what you value and figuring out how to make that happen. And so some books that I would personally recommend starting out with is Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin and The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And it's not going to talk to you about investing because, like I said, I think the investing is the easy part. You need to figure out the mindset first. And that's what those two books really tackle is, what is more important to you? What do you value in your life? How do you view money? Things like that. I think you need to have a good grasp there. And then, you can deep dive in. There's tons of bloggers out there, podcasts, depending, YouTube channels, depending your preference, audiobooks, ebooks, paperbacks, they're all out there. You just need to figure that out. And we have a list like on our blog of our favorite FIRE resources too, of different books that we've read that have such great information out there. And there's actually quite a bit now of just Canadian specific books, which is great to see those coming. There's probably 5 to 10 books that I would recommend that are on that list that have just, Canada only, whether it's investment or fees, things like that, that are just, catered towards Canadians, which is awesome. And yeah, the biggest thing is to enjoy the journey. Like I keep harping this, but it's not about deprivation. You want to build this lifestyle along the way. So that way, when you reach your FIRE number, it's not like a hard stop of this grind. And you're like, whew, okay, now what do I want to do today? Like, you should be doing those things along the way. So it's, testing out new hobbies, trying out new things, whatever it may be, like learning about, different people in your community, going to different meetups, just trying out different things that are free, low cost activities that are out there, becoming aware of them, trying them out, figure out what it is that you like, like, for example, a little thing that you can do to help, reduce an expense is say, all right, you're looking at your expenses and you say, okay, I have Hulu, I have Netflix, I have Disney Plus, I have Amazon Prime, all these subscriptions. It's like, okay, well, what if I just have Netflix for this month and watch everything that I want to watch on Netflix and then cancel Netflix and just have Disney Plus, next month. Things like that, right? Where you're not totally getting rid of these things, but you're just experimenting. You're like, okay, what if I get rid of this? Or do I really need that? And again, this is what you value. It's not because everyone has these things, you need to have them, right?
Absolutely. And those are some excellent points, Courtney. So we're actually not done. We're just wrapping up the conversation part of this webinar. And now for the next segment, we're actually going into live Q&A. So with that, thank you, Courtney. I'll see you in just a moment, stepping into our live Q&A.
Sounds good. See you over there.